Hello everyone, welcome back to my Pokemon review series. In this episode, we've got a bit of an interesting Pokemon to talk about, and actually two Pokemon I want to cover, because we're covering the Steelix line. Now, I want to cover both the Onix and the Steelix, because they both actually have a very good role doing what they do. Unlike other Pokemon that evolve, it's one of the few Pokemon in the game where leaving it unevolved is actually like a genuine option rather than just a niche pick for some like mono-type teams. But this is like one of the few situations where leaving it unevolved is actually a really good idea in some circumstances, depending on what you have in your account. Now, the Steelix and the Onix, respectively, I think are some of the most min-maxed Pokemon in the game, and I think they're a great example of why min-maxed in this game, while it is a good thing overall and makes them very powerful, it's not necessarily always the strongest thing to have a min-max Pokemon. And oftentimes when it comes to talking about the ingredient rate... Anyway, I'm going to get into talking about this, but first, I'm going to do this a little bit out of order compared to what I usually do, because I'd like to focus on what they have in common first before going to what they have different, and that is, they have the same ingredient list, because they're part of the same evolutionary line. So, I want to talk about that so that I can just talk about it once, get it out of the way, and then talk about what makes them different. Now, ingredients. They've got tomato, sausage, potato. Now, ultimately, on these guys, you're not really going to be caring about ingredients at all. They're probably the Pokemon in this entire game that you care the least amount of ingredients on, because their ingredient rate is horrendous, and they are berry specialists, so you don't really want ingredients anyway. Now, but if you if you want to look for the right ingredient list, what is it that you want? In my opinion, the tomato, potato is probably the easiest one to use, or the mono tomato, because really it's not going to be producing enough of anything in here, with just how terribly low their ingredient list or ingredient rate is. But you got the Dream Eater Butter Curry and you got the Green Grass Salad that have nice synergy with the tomato, potato. But realistically, even with a mono tomato option, you're still not making enough for even the lower of these meals. You're probably not even making 24 a day. So, for like the overheat ginger salad or the spore mushroom. So, realistically, don't worry about the ingredient list on this guy. It matters even less than it does on other berry specialists. So, now, I want to talk about what makes them different. And that is, start off with the Steelix. Now, Steelix has some pretty tough competition, because he's got competition with the Raichu. Which, if you know my thoughts about the Raichu, you know that I think it's one of the strongest Pokemon in this game. So, it's got competition with the Raichu for Favorite Berry Island, being a Steel type, whereas Raichu is an Electric type. Now, it's the Slumbering type, as is typical for Steel type Pokemon. It's the berry specialty, and it's got the Ingredient Magnet S. Now, I think Ingredient Magnet S is a very interesting main skill for berry Pokemon. It's kind of nice to just have to fill your ingredients, your pot size, a bit more. Oftentimes, if you run really strong berry teams, they tend to be lacking a little bit in the ingredients, and your pot size ends up being not fully filled, leading to weaker meals, and this can kind of negate that. However, with a 50-minute frequency and a 3.2% proc rate, it's really not going to be procking all that often. So, it's like, Now, when it comes to ingredients, the Steelix has one of the lowest ingredient rates in the game, especially for a mon this slow. Now, that is really, really important, and why I say that it is the most min-maxed Pokemon in this game. Because a lot of people really focus on min-maxing this, particularly. They think that having this being low on a berry specialist is really good. It is convenient for shutting your brain off kind of when you're planning to use them and just getting berries and not thinking about the ingredients at all. But I think the Steelix is a great example of why it's not necessarily always the case that this number being low is the best option. I don't think it's ever the worst option, but because in the Steelix's case, it actually makes him very strong. Now, a big part of that is the Belluberry, he makes the Steel-type berry, which is one of the strongest berries in the game, second to only the Dragon-type berry, and with a base value of 33. That is significantly stronger than other options, like what the Raichu has with 25 with the Greppa berry. So, he's proccing really strong berries, especially if it has Favorite Berry and Berry Finding S. This guy is just cranking out strength through berries, and he doesn't have much of that be eaten up by the ingredients, unlike how other berry specialists sometimes face, like the Feraligatr, for example, who has like a 25% ingredient rate. So it's really not bothered by its ingredients at all. Now, where it's very interesting, though, is Steelix does compete with Raichu, who's one of the easiest Pokemon to catch a really good one of, because its base form is really cheap and easy and comes across a lot. You can Slumber Hunt it, because it's a slumbering type. Its mid-evo is also only 7 pips, which isn't really that much more, so it's easy to catch. And you can see it on snoozing, so you can see Pichu on slumbering, Raichu, or Pikachu on snoozing. Makes it really easy to catch because you're seeing it on 2 or 3 sleep styles, and can reasonably catch them at both levels. And it doesn't really bother because it's a berry specialist, so this guy's got to compete with that. Now, Steelix is notoriously the most difficult berry specialist in the game to catch. It is the only one which is its base form takes 16 pips. That is more than 3 times the base value of pips for any other berry specialist in the game. All the other berry specialists we currently have are 5 pip base. So to have the Onix be just that absurd. And on top of that, it's Top Hollow exclusive, so you have to be going to Top Hollow. And on top of all that, it has some of the highest drowsy power requirements of any Pokemon, because it is treated as if it is a 16 pip rare Pokemon, because it is. In this game, it is a 16 pip rare Pokemon, which means its base form is just way more difficult to catch. You're pretty much never going to catch 10 of these guys to force Berry Finding S at the start. So realistic, and on top of that, you have to spend 1,400 sleep points to evolve an Onix into a Steelix, which is just an added cost. Now, you do have to do the same with the Raichu getting a Thunderstone, but the game provides you with a handful of free Thunderstones as you level up. This is not the case for the Steel Coat, since Steelix was added later on in the game's development. So the Steel Coat wasn't a thing when they made the badges to begin with. So you have to spend 1,400 sleep points to get this guy. He is expensive, he is rare, and I doubt hardly any players have a really, really, really good one, because of just all those factors working against him. Now, he does also spawn at the Old Gold Power Plant, but only as the fully evolved Steelix, which means you're going to be catching him for 20 pips instead of 16. I wouldn't recommend it. It's also going to be a lot rarer, but it's a chance to see him there specifically. Now, Onix is a bit more interesting because, well, Onix is a bit more interesting because he is actually really strong in his own right, and also one of the best berry specialists in the game when you get him to 2,000 hours slept. And he was even pretty good before that point, because he is the only rock-type berry specialist in the game. Slumbering type, typical for rock ones. And he's got the same sort of issues as the Steelix when it comes to his main skill, except for even worse, because it's even a lower skill proc rate, as you can see here. But he's even more min-maxed. He's got a 13.2% ingredient rate versus a 15.4%. Now, Onix doesn't care as much as the Steelix about ingredient rate being high, because as you can see, the citrus berry is a little bit weaker than the Bellue berry, but it's still pretty good, because like the citrus berry is still a pretty high up there strength berry, just not as good as the steel berry. So to see that be 13.2%, you can see that this guy is just really, really min-max. He's going to be finding berries and finding berries for days and hardly ever giving you an ingredient. One of those pesky, pesky tomatoes. So, now why would you ever consider Onix over Steelix? Well, I'm telling you this. I personally have no use for a Steelix in the current game because there are no Steel-type legendaries or Steel-type Pokemon to really make use of the Steel typing, and this guy only shares a berry with the Raichus, as I discussed earlier. Me having a fantastic Electric team, there's no reason to ever make a Steelix. So, it's better to leave him as an Onix to provide coverage at top, because he provides coverage at top. Now, he is competing with Typhlosion, which is also one of the strongest berry specialists in the game, but it's a bit more difficult to catch than Raichu. So, given that, it's worthwhile to consider, if you happen to catch a good Onix, to just leave it as an Onix and sleep with it enough that it gets the frequency buff. In fact, if you do this... Now, here I made a quick little analysis of all the Pokemon in the game. As you can see, all the berry specialists in the game. As you can see, Steelix is actually the best at producing berries. Berries on its own at 51,648. I have it sorted by berry strength right now, which is a decent amount more than Typhlosion and Raichu, and this is if it has Berry Finding S and Favored Berry. But it doesn't take into account the total strength, which is just adding in the value of their main skill and their as well as the value of their ingredients produced. And when you add in that balance, you can see that the Typhlosion actually beats out the Steelix again. However, to be a little bit fair, we could say if you would have given him a main skill seed to bring him up to the same evolution, the same skill level as his competitors, then he would beat them out. But that's really not that fair, because you're probably not going to be putting skill seeds into your Pokemon, your berry specialist. So that really just makes it that the Typhlosion is better, and he's not really that much better than like Meganium and Raichu. He is better at berries itself, but even in just raw ingredient strength, and you just factor in raw ingredient strength and skills, this guy is about the same. So it's why I think that min-maxed Pokemon aren't necessarily always the best, because especially if you're making good usage of those ingredients, then you can extract even more strength from those other Pokemon, leading to them being significantly stronger than the Steelix. He's not bad. He's great. If you have a good one, then go for it. But it's not really worth hunting in my eyes. But where it's really, really interesting is if I get rid of the filter that makes it that we can only see final evolutions, we can see that Onix, with 2,000 hours slept, actually beats out the Steelix in both raw berry production and in total strength. Now, it's going to take a long time to get an Onix at 2,000 hours slept. I wouldn't recommend even trying this unless you happen to have like a help bonus, Berry Finding S, Help Speed M, Onix. But if you have it, it is better than the Steelix pretty significantly too. And it's at an island that doesn't compete with the Raichu for like berry type. Now it does competing with the best berry specialist, the Typhlosion. But once again, Typhlosion's harder to hunt. So who knows? Now that's why I think the Onix provides very interesting coverage. And it's cheaper. So ultimately, I think that the Onix and Steelix, they're just too difficult to hunt to really be worth it with how expensive they are. They're not that much better than other berry specialists, even at their respective islands. But at the same time, if you happen to stumble across one that's really, really good, if you see one that's hungry, toss it a biscuit. Why not? It's a great Pokemon. It's a strong Pokemon. It's heavily min-maxed. And you don't really have to worry about its ingredients at all. You can get the strength out of it just by running it. So, it's just very interesting. But I wouldn't recommend hunting it, unless you just particularly like its design. If you are going to hunt it, though, Top Hollow is the place to go. Or the Old Gold Power Plant if you want the Steelix specifically. Wouldn't really recommend that, though. But it does save you on 1,400 sleep points on the metal coating. But you might be spending more on biscuits, so I think that kind of weighs itself out. And yeah, hope you learned something. Hope you thought a little bit more about just how the Steelix and the Onix work in this game. I hope you enjoyed. If you have, leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you.